Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to this quiet space, a place where minds slow down and hearts rest. Before we begin this gentle, sleepy journey, just a small moment of support. If this meditation brings you calm, comfort, or clarity, please subscribe to the channel, gently tap the like button, and leave a comment to let us know you are here. Your support helps us continue creating these peaceful spaces for your mind, for your heart. Now, there is nothing else you need to do, nothing to think about. Let's begin. Close your eyes now and slowly settle into a comfortable position. Take a gentle breath in and slowly breathe out. Let your shoulders relax, let your jaw loosen, and allow your whole body to feel heavy. Consciousness is a word that refers to the state of being aware of what is happening around you and what is happening inside your own mind and body. In science, consciousness is understood as a biological process that takes place within the structures of the brain and the nervous system. It is not something separate from the body. It is not something that exists outside of physical processes. It is instead a result of the activity of neurons. Neurons are cells in the brain that send and receive signals through electrical and chemical means. When scientists study consciousness, they are studying the ways in which the brain creates the experience of being aware, the experience of perceiving the world, and the experience of having thoughts and feelings. Consciousness is not a single thing. It is not located in one place. It is instead a collection of processes that occur simultaneously across many regions of the brain. These processes work together slowly, quietly, continuously to produce what we call conscious experience. The brain is an organ made up of billions of neurons, and each neuron is a cell that has the ability to generate electrical signals and to transmit these signals to other neurons. Neurons are connected to each other through structures called synapses, and at these synapses, neurons release chemicals known as neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters cross the small gap between one neuron and another, and when they reach the next neuron, they can either encourage that neuron to become active or discourage it from becoming active. This process of neurons sending signals to one another is happening constantly, all the time, throughout the brain. Even when you are sitting still, even when you are lying down, even when you are very quiet and very calm, your neurons are still active. They are still sending signals. They are still communicating with one another. This ongoing activity is the foundation of all brain function, and it is also the foundation of consciousness. Consciousness involves awareness, and awareness is the state of being able to detect and respond to information from the environment and from within the body. When you are aware of something, it means that neurons in your brain are processing information about that thing. For example, if you are aware of a sound, it is because neurons in the auditory cortex, a region of the brain that processes sounds, are receiving signals from the ears and interpreting those signals as sound. If you are aware of a sensation on your skin, it is because neurons in the somatosensory cortex, a region that processes touch and bodily sensations, are receiving signals from sensory receptors in the skin and interpreting those signals as touch or pressure or temperature. Awareness is not magical. It is not mysterious in a dramatic sense. It does not defy explanation. It is instead the result of neurons doing what neurons do, receiving information, processing that information, and sending signals to other neurons based on that information. Perception is closely related to awareness. Perception is the process by which the brain interprets sensory information and constructs an understanding of what is happening in the world. When light enters your eyes, it strikes cells in the retina, a layer of tissue at the back of the eye. These cells convert the light into electrical signals, and these signals travel along the optic nerve to the brain. In the brain, these signals are processed by neurons in the visual cortex located at the back of the brain in a region called the occipital lobe. The neurons in the visual cortex analyze the signals slowly, carefully, extracting information about shapes, colors, movements, and other visual features. This process of analyzing and interpreting visual information is what we call visual perception. Similar processes occur for other senses. Sounds are perceived through the processing of signals in the auditory cortex. Smells are perceived through the processing of signals in the olfactory cortex. Touch is perceived through the processing of signals in the somatosensory cortex. All of these perceptual processes are examples of the brain taking raw sensory data and slowly, quietly turning that data into conscious experience. Experience itself is another aspect of consciousness. Experience refers to the subjective quality of what it is like to perceive something, or to think about something, or to feel something. When you see the color red, there is a certain quality to that experience, a certain way that it feels to see red. When you hear a sound, there is a certain quality to that experience as well. Scientists often refer to these qualities as qualia, which is a term that simply means the subjective aspects of conscious experience. The neural basis of qualia is not entirely understood, but it is believed that qualia arise from patterns of activity in the brain. When neurons in the visual cortex are active in a certain pattern, that pattern corresponds to the experience of seeing red. When neurons in the auditory cortex are active in a different pattern, that pattern corresponds to the experience of hearing a particular sound. The patterns are not the same as the experiences, but the patterns are what give rise to the experiences. The patterns are the physical substrate upon which experience is built. Neurons are the basic units of the nervous system, and each neuron is a cell with a cell body, dendrites, and an axon. The cell body contains the nucleus and other structures that keep the cell alive. The dendrites are branching extensions that receive signals from other neurons. The axon is a long extension that sends signals to other neurons. Neurons communicate by generating electrical signals known as action potentials. An action potential is a brief change in the electrical charge across the membrane of the neuron. When a neuron is at rest, the inside of the cell is negatively charged compared to the outside. When the neuron receives enough stimulation from other neurons, the charge across the membrane changes rapidly. And this change is the action potential. The action potential travels down the axon to the axon terminals, which are the endpoints of the axon. At the axon terminals, the action potential triggers the release of neurotransmitters into the synapse. The neurotransmitters then bind to receptors on the dendrites of the next neuron. And this binding can trigger a new action potential in that neuron. This process repeats over and over, with neurons sending signals to other neurons, creating a vast network of communication throughout the brain. Neural networks are groups of neurons that are connected to one another and that work together to perform specific functions. The brain contains many different neural networks, and each network is involved in different aspects of brain function. Some networks are involved in processing sensory information. Some networks are involved in controlling movement. Some networks are involved in memory. Some networks are involved in attention. Some networks are involved in emotion. Some networks are involved in language. All of these networks are active at the same time, and they all contribute to the overall state of consciousness. Consciousness is not produced by a single network. It is instead produced by the coordinated activity of many networks working together. When these networks are functioning normally, consciousness is present. When these networks are not functioning normally, consciousness can be altered or reduced. The brain is divided into many different regions, and each region has specific roles in brain function. The cerebral cortex is the outer layer of the brain, and it is involved in many higher-level functions such as perception, thought, memory, and decision-making. The cerebral cortex is divided into 4 lobes. The frontal lobe is at the front of the brain and is involved in planning, decision-making, and controlling movement. The parietal lobe is at the top and back of the brain and is involved in processing sensory information and in spatial awareness. The temporal lobe is at the side of the brain and is involved in processing auditory information and in memory. The occipital lobe is at the back of the brain and is involved in processing visual information. Beneath the cerebral cortex are other structures, including the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the brainstem. Each of these structures plays a role in different aspects of brain function, and many of them are involved in consciousness. The thalamus is a structure located deep within the brain, and it acts as a relay station for sensory information. Almost all sensory information that enters the brain passes through the thalamus before being sent to the cerebral cortex. The thalamus is involved in regulating consciousness because it controls the flow of information to the cortex. When the thalamus is functioning normally, sensory information is transmitted to the cortex, and consciousness is present. When the thalamus is not functioning normally, the flow of information to the cortex is disrupted, and consciousness can be reduced or lost. The thalamus is also involved in regulating sleep and wakefulness, and it plays a role in the transitions between different states of consciousness. The brainstem is located at the base of the brain, and it connects the brain to the spinal cord. The brainstem is involved in many basic functions, such as breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure. It also contains structures that are involved in regulating consciousness. One of these structures is the reticular activating system, which is a network of neurons that extends through the brainstem and into the thalamus. The reticular activating system is involved in maintaining wakefulness and alertness. When the reticular activating system is active, it sends signals to the thalamus and the cortex. that promote wakefulness. When the reticular activating system is less active, wakefulness decreases, and drowsiness or sleep can occur. Damage to the reticular activating system can result in a loss of consciousness or in a coma, which is a state in which a person is not aware of their surroundings and cannot be awakened. The prefrontal cortex is a region of the frontal lobe that is located at the very front of the brain. The prefrontal cortex is involved in many high-level cognitive functions, such as planning, decision-making, working memory, and attention. It is also involved in self-awareness and in the ability to think about one's own thoughts, which is known as metacognition. The prefrontal cortex is highly developed in humans, and it is thought to play a particularly important role in human consciousness. When the prefrontal cortex is active, people are able to focus their attention, to think about abstract concepts, and to make complex decisions. When the prefrontal cortex is less active, such as during sleep or during certain altered states of consciousness, these abilities are reduced. The parietal cortex is involved in integrating sensory information and in creating a sense of space and of the body's position in space. Some researchers believe that the parietal cortex is also involved in creating the sense of self, which is the feeling of being a distinct individual with a body and a perspective. When the parietal cortex is active, people have a clear sense of where their body is and where they are in relation to the world around them. When the parietal cortex is less active, or when it is damaged, people can experience changes in their sense of self or in their sense of space. These changes can include feelings of detachment from the body or feelings that the boundaries between the self and the world are not clear. Electrical signaling in the brain is the primary means by which neurons communicate with one another. As mentioned earlier, neurons generate action potentials, which are electrical signals that travel along the axon. The generation of an action potential involves changes in the concentrations of ions, which are charged particles, on either side of the neuron's membrane. When a neuron is at rest, there are more sodium ions outside the cell and more potassium ions inside the cell. This difference in ion concentration creates an electrical potential across the membrane, When the neuron is stimulated, channels in the membrane open and sodium ions rush into the cell. This influx of sodium ions causes the inside of the cell to become more positive, and this change in charge is the action potential. After the action potential, potassium ions flow out of the cell, and the neuron returns to its resting state. This process happens very quickly. In just a few milliseconds, the action potential travels down the axon without losing strength, and when it reaches the axon terminals, it triggers the release of neurotransmitters. Chemical signaling in the brain occurs at the synapses, which are the junctions between neurons. When an action potential reaches the axon terminal, it causes vesicles, which are small sacs containing neurotransmitters, to merge with the membrane of the axon terminal and release their contents into the synaptic cleft. The synaptic cleft is the small gap between the axon terminal of one neuron and the dendrite of another neuron. The neurotransmitters diffuse across the synaptic cleft and bind to receptors on the membrane of the receiving neuron. When neurotransmitters bind to receptors, they cause changes in the receiving neuron. Some neurotransmitters cause the receiving neuron to become more likely to generate an action potential. These are called excitatory neurotransmitters. Other neurotransmitters cause the receiving neuron to become less likely to generate an action potential. These are called inhibitory neurotransmitters. The balance between excitatory and inhibitory signals determines whether the receiving neuron will generate an action potential. There are many different types of neurotransmitters in the brain, and each type has specific effects. Glutamate is the most common excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. It is involved in many processes, including learning and memory. GABA, which stands for gamma-aminobutyric acid, is the most common inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. It is involved in reducing neuronal activity and in promoting relaxation and sleep. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is involved in reward, motivation, and movement. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that is involved in mood, sleep, and appetite. Norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter that is involved in alertness and arousal. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that is involved in attention, learning, and muscle control. Each of these neurotransmitters plays a role in different aspects of brain function, and the levels and activity of these neurotransmitters can affect consciousness. Consciousness exists on a continuum, and there are different levels of consciousness that correspond to different states of brain activity. During full wakefulness, the brain is highly active, and consciousness is at its highest level. During wakefulness, neurons throughout the brain are firing in complex patterns, and many different brain regions are communicating with one another. Sensory information is being processed. Attention is being directed to different stimuli. Thoughts are being generated and evaluated. Memories are being accessed. The person is fully aware of their surroundings and of themselves. This state of full wakefulness is what most people think of when they think of consciousness, but it is not the only state of consciousness. As a person begins to relax, the level of brain activity can change. During relaxation, the brain is still active, but the patterns of activity shift. There may be a decrease in the activity of the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in active thinking and decision-making. There may be an increase in the activity of brain regions that are involved in the default mode network, which is a network of brain regions that are active when a person is not focused on the external world and is instead engaged in internal thought or daydreaming. During relaxation, consciousness is still present, but it may feel different than during active wakefulness. The focus of attention may become more diffuse. Thoughts may wander. The person may become less aware of external stimuli and more aware of internal sensations or thoughts. Drowsiness is a state that occurs between wakefulness and sleep. During drowsiness, the level of brain activity decreases further. The reticular activating system becomes less active, and the signals that maintain wakefulness are reduced. The person may experience a decrease in alertness and a decrease in the ability to focus attention. Thoughts may become less coherent. The person may have brief moments of microsleep, which are very short periods of sleep that last only a few seconds. During drowsiness, consciousness is still present, but it is reduced. The person is still somewhat aware of their surroundings, but this awareness is less clear and less consistent than during full wakefulness. Sleep is a state of altered consciousness that occurs regularly in humans and in many other animals. During sleep, the brain is still active, but the patterns of activity are very different from those during wakefulness. Sleep is not a single, uniform state. It is instead divided into different stages, and each stage has distinct characteristics. The stages of sleep are defined based on patterns of brain activity that can be measured using electroencephalography, which is a technique that records electrical activity in the brain using electrodes placed on the scalp. The electrical activity that is recorded is displayed as a series of waves, and the characteristics of these waves, such as their frequency and amplitude, change depending on the stage of sleep. There are two main types of sleep: non-REM sleep and REM sleep. Non-REM sleep is divided into 3 stages, which are often referred to as N1, N2, and N3. N1 is the lightest stage of sleep, and it occurs during the transition from wakefulness to sleep. During N1, the brain produces slower waves than during wakefulness, and the person may experience a decrease in muscle tone and a decrease in awareness. N1 sleep is very brief, usually lasting only a few minutes. N2 is a deeper stage of sleep than N1. During N2, the brain produces waves that are somewhat slower, and there are also brief bursts of rapid brain activity called sleep spindles, and large waves called K-complexes. N2 sleep makes up the majority of total sleep time. N3 is the deepest stage of non-REM sleep, and it is also known as slow-wave sleep or deep sleep. During N3, the brain produces very slow, large amplitude waves called delta waves. N3 sleep is the stage during which the brain is least responsive to external stimuli, and it is the stage that is most associated with the restorative functions of sleep. During non-REM sleep, consciousness is greatly reduced. In N1 and N2, there may be some awareness of the environment, but this awareness is fragmented and inconsistent. In N3, awareness is minimal. The person is not consciously aware of what is happening around them, and they do not have clear thoughts or experiences. If awakened from N3 sleep, the person may feel disoriented and confused for a few moments. The reduction in consciousness during non-REM sleep is due to changes in brain activity. The thalamus reduces the amount of sensory information that is sent to the cortex. The prefrontal cortex becomes less active. The overall level of neuronal firing decreases. The brain is still active, but the activity is less coordinated and less integrated than during wakefulness. REM sleep is a stage of sleep that is characterized by rapid eye movements, which is where the name REM comes from. During REM sleep, the brain is highly active, and the patterns of brain activity are similar in some ways to the patterns during wakefulness. The brain produces waves that are faster and smaller in amplitude than the waves during non-REM sleep. Despite the high level of brain activity, the body is largely paralyzed during REM sleep. This paralysis is caused by signals from the brainstem that inhibit motor neurons in the spinal cord, preventing the body from moving. This paralysis is thought to prevent the body from acting out dreams, which occur primarily during REM sleep. During REM sleep, consciousness is altered in a different way than during non-REM sleep. Instead of a reduction in consciousness, there is a change in the content and quality of consciousness. During REM sleep, people experience dreams, which are sequences of images, thoughts, and emotions that occur during sleep. Dreams can feel vivid and real, even though they are generated entirely by the brain and do not correspond to events in the external world. The brain regions that are active during REM sleep include the visual cortex, the motor cortex, the limbic system, which is involved in emotion, and parts of the temporal lobe, which is involved in memory. The prefrontal cortex, which is involved in logical thinking and self-awareness, is less active during REM sleep than during wakefulness. This reduced activity of the prefrontal cortex may explain why dreams often have illogical or bizarre elements, and why people often do not realize that they are dreaming while the dream is occurring. The content of dreams can vary widely, Some dreams are based on recent experiences or memories. Some dreams include familiar people or places. Some dreams are strange or fantastical. The brain during REM sleep seems to combine elements from memory in new and sometimes unexpected ways. The emotions that are experienced during dreams can be intense. Some dreams are pleasant. Some dreams are frightening or distressing. The emotional content of dreams is thought to be related to the activity of the limbic system, particularly the amygdala, which is a structure that is involved in processing emotions, especially fear. During REM sleep, the amygdala can be highly active, which may contribute to the emotional intensity of dreams. The transitions between different stages of sleep occur throughout the night. A typical night of sleep involves multiple cycles through the different stages. Each cycle lasts about 90 minutes. Early in the night, the cycles include more N3 deep sleep. Later in the night, the cycles include more REM sleep. This cycling through different stages is regulated by the interactions of many different neurotransmitters and brain regions. The regulation of sleep and wakefulness involves a balance between systems that promote wakefulness and systems that promote sleep. The wake-promoting systems include the reticular activating system and neurons that release neurotransmitters such as norepinephrine, serotonin, and histamine. The sleep-promoting systems include neurons in the hypothalamus that release GABA and that inhibit the wake-promoting systems. The gradual nature of the transitions between wakefulness and sleep is important. Consciousness does not simply turn off like a light switch. Instead, it fades gradually as the brain transitions from one state to another. During the transition from wakefulness to sleep, awareness becomes less focused. Thoughts become less coherent, and the ability to respond to the environment decreases. This gradual fading of consciousness is due to the gradual changes in brain activity that occur during the transition as the wake-promoting systems become less active and the sleep-promoting systems become more active. The patterns of neuronal activity shift, and consciousness diminishes. Attention is an important component of consciousness. Attention is the process by which the brain selects certain information to process more fully, while ignoring other information. During wakefulness, attention can be directed voluntarily, such as when you decide to focus on reading a book, or it can be captured involuntarily, such as when a loud noise draws your attention. Attention involves the coordinated activity of several brain regions, including the prefrontal cortex, the parietal cortex, and structures in the brainstem. When attention is focused on something, neurons that are processing information about that thing become more active, and neurons that are processing other information become less active. This selective enhancement and suppression of neuronal activity is what allows the brain to focus on relevant information and to filter out irrelevant information. The regulation of attention is not constant throughout the day. During wakefulness, the ability to sustain attention can vary, depending on many factors, including how alert the person is, how tired they are, and what they are doing. During drowsiness, the ability to sustain attention decreases. Attention becomes more difficult to maintain, and the focus of attention may drift. During sleep, the regulation of attention is fundamentally different. The brain is not actively selecting information from the environment to process. Instead, the brain is largely cut off from the external world, and the activity of the brain is driven more by internal processes than by external stimuli. Many processes in the brain occur without conscious awareness. These are called automatic processes. Automatic processes include things like the regulation of breathing, the beating of the heart, the digestion of food, and many aspects of movement and perception. These processes are carried out by neural circuits that operate without requiring conscious attention or intention. For example, when you walk, you do not have to consciously think about each step. The neural circuits in the spinal cord and the brainstem coordinate the movements of your legs automatically. When you see an object, you do not have to consciously think about interpreting the visual information. The neurons in your visual cortex automatically process the information and extract features like shape and color. These automatic processes are essential for daily functioning, and they allow the brain to carry out many tasks efficiently without overwhelming conscious awareness. The distinction between conscious and unconscious processes is an important area of study in neuroscience. Some information processing in the brain reaches conscious awareness, and some does not. The factors that determine whether a process becomes conscious are not entirely understood, but it is believed that consciousness requires a certain level of integration and coordination of activity across different brain regions. When information is processed locally in one brain region and is not shared with other regions, it may not become conscious. When information is processed in a way that involves communication between many different brain regions, it is more likely to become conscious. The global workspace theory is one theory of consciousness that proposes that consciousness arises when information is broadcast to many different brain regions and becomes available to a wide range of cognitive processes. According to this theory, the brain contains many specialized modules that process different types of information. And when information from one of these modules is selected to be broadcast to the rest of the brain, that information becomes conscious. Despite many advances in neuroscience, consciousness is still not fully understood. Scientists have learned a great deal about the brain regions and processes that are involved in consciousness, but there is still much that is not known. One of the challenges in studying consciousness is that it is subjective. Each person's experience of consciousness is private and cannot be directly observed by others. Scientists can study the brain activity that is associated with consciousness, and they can ask people to report their experiences, but they cannot directly measure the subjective quality of experience. This has led to ongoing debates about the nature of consciousness and about how to study it scientifically. Another challenge is that consciousness is not a single thing that can be easily defined or measured. It is a complex phenomenon that involves many different processes and many different brain regions. Different aspects of consciousness, such as awareness attention, perception, and self-awareness may have different neural bases, and they may be dissociable from one another. For example, it is possible for a person to be aware of their surroundings, but to have impaired self-awareness, or to have intact perception, but impaired attention. This complexity makes it difficult to develop a unified theory of consciousness. There are also questions about the extent to which different animals are conscious. Many animals have brains and nervous systems, and many animals show behaviors that suggest they are aware of their surroundings and can respond to stimuli. However, it is not clear whether animals experience consciousness in the same way that humans do, or whether some animals are conscious and others are not. The study of animal consciousness is complicated by the fact that animals cannot report their experiences in the way that humans can. Scientists must rely on indirect measures, such as brain activity and behavior, to infer whether an animal is conscious. The limits of current scientific understanding mean that there are many questions about consciousness that remain unanswered. For example, why does consciousness exist at all? What is the evolutionary advantage of consciousness? Could a machine or an artificial intelligence system be conscious? These questions are topics of ongoing research and philosophical discussion. While science has provided many insights into the mechanisms of consciousness, there is still much to learn, and it is likely that new discoveries will continue to refine and expand our understanding in the future. As the brain transitions from wakefulness to sleep, conscious awareness gradually diminishes. This transition is not abrupt. It is instead a gradual process that involves many changes in brain activity. As the wake-promoting systems become less active, the level of neuronal firing decreases, and the patterns of activity in the brain change. The thalamus begins to reduce the flow of sensory information to the cortex. The prefrontal cortex becomes less active, and the ability to maintain focused attention decreases. Thoughts become less organized and less coherent. the person may experience brief fragments of thought or imagery that do not follow a logical sequence. This is the beginning of the transition from wakefulness to sleep. As the transition continues, awareness of the external environment decreases. Sounds that were clearly audible during wakefulness may become less noticeable. The feeling of the bed or the pillow may become less distinct. The person may become less aware of their body position. These changes occur because the brain is processing less sensory information, and because the brain regions that are involved in creating a sense of the environment and the body are becoming less active. At the same time, internal sensations may become more prominent. The person may become more aware of the rhythm of their breathing or the beating of their heart. They may notice sensations of relaxation or heaviness in their muscles. These internal sensations can be part of the experience of falling asleep. During the transition to sleep, the sense of time can also change. Minutes may feel longer or shorter than they actually are. The person may lose track of how much time has passed. This altered sense of time is due to changes in the way the brain processes temporal information. During wakefulness, the brain uses various cues to keep track of time, including sensory information, the sequence of events, and internal signals. As these processes are disrupted during the transition to sleep, the perception of time becomes less accurate. The gradual quieting of conscious thought is a natural part of the process of falling asleep. As the brain becomes less active, the stream of thoughts that is present during wakefulness begins to slow down. Thoughts may become more disjointed. They may jump from one topic to another without a clear connection. The person may have difficulty holding on to a train of thought. This is because the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in organizing and directing thought, is becoming less active. As the prefrontal cortex quiets, the ability to maintain coherent directed thinking decreases, and thoughts become more fragmented and more dreamlike. In some cases, people may experience hypnagogic imagery during the transition to sleep. Hypnagogic imagery refers to visual or auditory experiences that occur as a person is falling asleep. These experiences can include seeing flashes of light, seeing shapes or images, hearing sounds or voices, or having brief, vivid mental images. Hypnagogic imagery is thought to be related to the activation of sensory areas of the brain. In the absence of actual sensory input, the brain is in a state between wakefulness and sleep, and the activity in sensory areas can produce experiences that feel like perception, even though there is no external stimulus. Hypnagogic imagery is generally brief and fleeting, and it is a normal part of the transition to sleep. As the person moves deeper into sleep, conscious awareness continues to decrease. The brain enters the first stage of sleep, N1, which is a very light stage of sleep. During N1, the person is no longer fully awake, but they are not yet deeply asleep. If awakened from N1, the person may not even realize that they were asleep. They may report that they were just resting, or that their mind was wandering. This is because the level of consciousness during N1 is very close to the level of consciousness during drowsy wakefulness. The distinction between wakefulness and N1 sleep is subtle, and it is defined more by changes in brainwave patterns than by changes in subjective experience. As sleep deepens and the person transitions into N2 and then N3 sleep, conscious awareness diminishes further. During N2, the person is clearly asleep, but they can still be awakened relatively easily. During N3, the person is in deep sleep, and they are much harder to awaken. If awakened from N3, they may feel groggy and disoriented. During both N2 and N3, the person is not consciously aware of what is happening around them. They are not thinking in the way that they think during wakefulness. consciousness is greatly reduced, and the experience is one of absence or blankness. The person is not perceiving the world. They are not directing their thoughts. They are simply in a state of deep rest. The brain continues to cycle through the different stages of sleep throughout the night. After a period of deep sleep, the brain may transition back to lighter stages of sleep and then into REM sleep. During REM sleep, consciousness returns in a different form as the person experiences dreams. After REM sleep, the cycle begins again, with the brain transitioning back into non-REM sleep. These cycles repeat multiple times during the night, and each cycle involves changes in the level and quality of consciousness. The repeated cycling through different states of consciousness during sleep is a normal and healthy part of the sleep process, and it is regulated by the complex interactions of many different brain systems. The process of waking up involves a reversal of the changes that occurred during falling asleep as the brain transitions from sleep to wakefulness. The wake-promoting systems become more active, and the sleep-promoting systems become less active. The thalamus begins to increase the flow of sensory information to the cortex. The reticular activating system becomes more active, sending signals that promote alertness. The prefrontal cortex begins to increase its activity, and the ability to think clearly and to direct attention returns. Consciousness gradually increases. As these changes occur, the person becomes more aware of their surroundings. They begin to process sensory information more fully. They become able to think and to plan. The transition from sleep to wakefulness is like the transition from wakefulness to sleep, a gradual process that involves many changes in brain activity. The study of consciousness is an ongoing field of research, and scientists continue to investigate the neuromechanisms that give rise to conscious experience. Advances in brain imaging techniques, such as functional magnetic resonance imaging and electroencephalography, have allowed researchers to observe brain activity in greater detail and to correlate patterns of brain activity with different states of consciousness. Studies of people with brain injuries or neurological conditions have provided insights into which brain regions are necessary for consciousness and which aspects of consciousness can be disrupted by damage to specific areas. Studies of sleep and anesthesia have provided information about how consciousness can be reduced or altered by changes in brain chemistry and brain activity. One area of research involves studying the neural correlates of consciousness, which are the specific patterns of brain activity that are associated with conscious experience. Researchers have identified certain features of brain activity that are consistently present when people are conscious and that are absent or reduced when people are unconscious. These features include the level of overall brain activity, the degree of communication between different brain regions, and the complexity of brain activity patterns. By identifying the neural correlates of consciousness, researchers hope to gain a better understanding of how consciousness arises from brain activity. Another area of research involves studying disorders of consciousness. Some people, due to brain injury or illness, may be in a state where consciousness is severely impaired. For example, a person in a coma is unconscious and cannot be awakened. A person in a vegetative state may have periods of wakefulness, but they do not show signs of awareness of themselves or their surroundings. A person in a minimally conscious state shows some signs of awareness, but their level of consciousness is significantly reduced. Studying these disorders has helped researchers understand which brain functions are necessary for consciousness, and has also raised important ethical questions about how to care for people who have disorders of consciousness. Research on anesthesia has also provided insights into consciousness. Anesthetic drugs are used to induce unconsciousness during surgery, and understanding how these drugs work can help researchers understand the mechanisms of consciousness. Different anesthetic drugs act on different neurotransmitter systems in the brain. Some drugs enhance the activity of GABA, which is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter, and this reduces overall brain activity. Some drugs block the activity of glutamate, which is the main excitatory neurotransmitter. Some drugs affect the activity of other neurotransmitters, such as acetylcholine or serotonin. Despite the differences in their mechanisms of action, all anesthetic drugs produce a loss of consciousness, and this suggests that there may be common neural pathways or processes that are essential for consciousness and that are disrupted by these drugs. The relationship between consciousness and the brain is complex, and there are still many aspects of this relationship that are not fully understood. One question is whether consciousness is produced entirely by the brain, or whether it involves other factors. The scientific consensus is that consciousness is a product of brain activity, but there are still debates about the details of how this occurs. Another question is whether consciousness is a binary state, where a person is either conscious or unconscious, or whether it is a graded phenomenon where there are many different levels or degrees of consciousness. The evidence suggests that consciousness is graded and that there are many intermediate states between full wakefulness and complete unconsciousness. The subjective nature of consciousness also raises questions about how it can be studied objectively. Each person's conscious experience is unique and private, and there is no way to directly compare one person's experience with another person's experience. This has led to discussions about the hard problem of consciousness, which is the question of why and how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience. While scientists have made progress in understanding the neural correlates of consciousness and the mechanisms that support conscious processing, the hard problem remains a topic of philosophical debate. Despite these challenges, the scientific study of consciousness has made significant progress, and researchers continue to develop new methods and theories to understand this complex phenomenon. Advances in technology, such as more sophisticated brain imaging techniques and computational models of brain function, are providing new tools for studying consciousness Interdisciplinary approaches that combine neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, and computer science are helping to address questions about consciousness from multiple perspectives. As research continues, it is likely that our understanding of consciousness will continue to grow and new insights will emerge about how the brain creates the experience of being aware, the process of becoming less conscious, which occurs naturally as a person falls asleep, involves many of the same mechanisms that are involved in consciousness itself. As the brain transitions from wakefulness to sleep, the activity of wake-promoting systems decreases, and the activity of sleep-promoting systems increases. The flow of sensory information to the cortex is reduced. The activity of the prefrontal cortex and other regions involved in attention and thought decreases. The patterns of electrical activity in the brain change, with slower and more synchronized waves becoming more prominent. These changes occur gradually, and they result in a gradual decrease in conscious awareness. During this transition, the experience of consciousness shifts from the focused, organized awareness of wakefulness to the more fragmented, dreamlike awareness of drowsiness, and finally to the minimal awareness of sleep. The person's sense of self may become less distinct. The boundary between internal thought and external perception may become less clear. The ability to control attention and to direct thought diminishes. All of these changes are the result of changes in the activity of neural circuits in the brain, and they reflect the dynamic nature of consciousness. The fading of consciousness during the transition to sleep is a natural and necessary process. Sleep is essential for health and well-being, and the reduction in conscious awareness during sleep allows the brain to carry out important restorative functions. During sleep, the brain consolidates memories, clears metabolic waste products, and regulates various physiological processes. The cycling through different stages of sleep, each with its own characteristic patterns of brain activity and levels of consciousness, is part of the normal rhythm of life. The transition from wakefulness to sleep and back again occurs every day, and it is regulated by circadian rhythms, which are internal biological clocks that coordinate the timing of sleep and wakefulness. With the cycle of day and night, as conscious awareness continues to diminish during the process of falling asleep, thoughts become quieter and more distant. The active engagement with the world that characterizes wakefulness gives way to a state of rest and disengagement. The brain remains active, but its activity is directed inward rather than outward. The processes that maintain consciousness during wakefulness are gradually suspended, and the processes that support sleep take over. This transition is smooth and continuous, without sudden changes or disruptions, and it reflects the highly regulated and coordinated nature of brain function. The experience of falling asleep is different for each person, and it can vary from night to night. Some people fall asleep quickly and easily, while others may take longer. Some people may experience a smooth transition, while others may have brief awakenings or disruptions. These differences are due to variations in individual physiology, in sleep habits, and in environmental factors. However, the underlying biological processes that govern the transition from wakefulness to sleep are the same for everyone. The brain follows the same basic sequence of changes, with wake-promoting systems becoming less active, sleep-promoting systems becoming more active, and patterns of brain activity shifting from those associated with wakefulness to those associated with sleep. The continuation of this transition leads to deeper and deeper states of sleep, with consciousness becoming more and more reduced. During the deepest stages of sleep, awareness is minimal, and the person is largely disconnected from the external world. The brain is in a state that is fundamentally different from wakefulness, and yet it is still active and still carrying out important functions. The neurons are still firing, still sending signals to one another. But the patterns of activity are different, and the result is a state of unconsciousness or near unconsciousness. This state allows the body and the brain to rest and to recover from the activities of the day. As the night progresses and the brain cycles through different stages of sleep, consciousness ebbs and flows. During deep sleep, consciousness is at its lowest. During REM sleep, consciousness returns in the form of dreams, which are a unique form of conscious experience that occurs during sleep. The dreaming brain is active and generating experiences. But these experiences are not grounded in the external world. They are instead generated internally by the brain, drawing on memories and emotions and combining them in new and often unexpected ways. After REM sleep, the brain may cycle back to deep sleep, and consciousness diminishes again. This cycling continues throughout the night, creating a rhythm of changing states of consciousness. The entire process, from falling asleep to waking up, is a demonstration of the dynamic and flexible nature of consciousness. Consciousness is not a fixed or static property. It is instead a process that changes continuously in response to changes in brain activity and in response to internal and external factors. The brain has the remarkable ability to shift between different states of consciousness, each with its own characteristic features and its own adaptive functions. Wakefulness allows for interaction with the world and for active thought and behavior. Sleep allows for rest and restoration. Dreams allow for the processing of emotions and memories. In a different context, all of these states are essential for healthy functioning, and they all depend on the coordinated activity of billions of neurons working together in complex networks. The neural processes that support consciousness are the result of millions of years of evolution. The brain has evolved to process information, to respond to the environment, and to regulate behavior in ways that promote survival and reproduction. Consciousness is a product of this evolutionary process. It allows organisms to perceive the world, to make decisions, to plan for the future, and to reflect on the past. The complexity of the human brain, with its many specialized regions and its vast networks of connections, enables a particularly rich and elaborate form of consciousness. However, the basic principles that govern consciousness in humans are likely similar to the principles that govern consciousness in other animals with complex nervous systems. The neurons generate electrical signals. The signals are transmitted through synapses by chemical neurotransmitters, and the patterns of activity across networks of neurons give rise to experience. Understanding consciousness from a scientific perspective requires focusing on these biological processes and on the ways in which they give rise to subjective experience. It involves studying the structure and function of the brain, the patterns of electrical and chemical activity, and the ways in which different brain regions interact with one another. It involves conducting experiments to test hypotheses about the neural basis of consciousness and to identify the factors that affect consciousness. It involves developing theories that can explain how consciousness arises from the physical processes of the brain. This scientific approach has yielded many insights, and it continues to be a productive way of investigating consciousness. The gradual reduction in consciousness that occurs during the transition to sleep is an example of how consciousness can be modulated by changes in brain state. The same neural circuits that support consciousness during wakefulness are still present during sleep, but their activity is reduced or altered, and as a result, consciousness is reduced or altered. This demonstrates that consciousness is not an all-or-nothing phenomenon. It is instead a graded phenomenon that can vary in intensity and in quality, depending on the state of the brain. The brain has many different states, and each state is associated with a different level and type of consciousness. The study of consciousness is an area where many different fields of science come together. Neuroscience provides information about the structure and function of the brain. Psychology provides information about behavior and subjective experience. Biology provides information about the evolution and physiology of organisms. Physics and chemistry provide information about the fundamental processes that underlie all biological phenomena. Philosophy provides conceptual frameworks for thinking about consciousness and for addressing questions that may not be answerable through empirical research alone. By bringing together insights from all of these fields, scientists and scholars are working to develop a more complete understanding of consciousness. As the process of falling asleep continues, and as consciousness continues to fade, the person enters into a state where they are no longer actively aware of their surroundings or of themselves. They are no longer thinking in the way that they think during wakefulness. They are simply resting, with their brain in a state that supports the restorative processes of sleep. This state is peaceful and quiet, with minimal conscious experience. The brain is still working, still maintaining the body's basic functions, still cycling through the stages of sleep, but the person is not aware of any of this. They are in a state of rest, and this rest is essential for their health and well-being. The transition from consciousness to near unconsciousness during sleep is a natural part of the daily rhythm of life. It is a process that has been shaped by evolution and that is regulated by complex biological mechanisms. It is a process that occurs every night, allowing the brain and the body to rest and to prepare for the next day. The fading of consciousness during this transition is gradual and smooth, reflecting the highly coordinated and regulated nature of brain function. As consciousness fades, thoughts become quieter, awareness diminishes, and the person enters into the restful state of sleep. Even though consciousness fades during sleep, the brain remains highly active in ways that are critical for health, memory, and cognitive function. One of the most important processes that occurs during sleep is memory consolidation. Memories formed during wakefulness are reactivated and reorganized during sleep, particularly during NREM stages and REM sleep. This reactivation allows the brain to strengthen important neural connections while pruning weaker or less relevant ones. Synaptic plasticity, the ability of synapses to strengthen or weaken over time, plays a central role in this process. The restructuring of neural circuits ensures that the brain retains relevant information and discards redundant or unnecessary details, allowing learning to be more efficient. Sleep, therefore, is not a passive state. It is an active period of neural processing that enhances cognitive abilities. During deep NREM sleep, particularly N3, the brain exhibits slow-wave activity, characterized by delta waves. These slow waves reflect highly synchronized neuronal activity and indicate that large networks of neurons are firing in unison. This synchronized activity is associated with restorative functions, such as the clearance of metabolic waste from the brain, the glymphatic system, a network that helps remove toxins and waste products, becomes more active during sleep, particularly during slow-wave sleep. This cleaning process is thought to reduce the risk of neurodegenerative diseases and is essential for long-term brain health. The diminished consciousness during deep sleep facilitates these restorative processes, by minimizing interference from sensory input and active thought, allowing the brain to focus resources on maintenance and repair. REM sleep, in contrast, presents a unique form of consciousness that is distinct from both wakefulness and non-REM sleep. During REM sleep, the brain exhibits high-frequency, low-amplitude waves that resemble the activity observed during wakefulness. However, the nature of this consciousness is internally generated rather than externally driven. Dreams during REM sleep often incorporate fragments of recent experiences, long-term memories, emotions, and abstract concepts. The integration of these elements may allow the brain to simulate different scenarios, process emotional experiences, and consolidate memory in a rich and flexible manner. The amygdala, hippocampus, and other limbic structures are particularly active during REM sleep, which helps explain the emotional intensity and vividness of dreams. The prefrontal cortex, on the other hand, shows reduced activity, contributing to the often illogical, non-linear, and bizarre quality of dream narratives. The cyclical alternation between NREM and REM sleep throughout the night reflects a finely tuned balance between different neural systems. Each cycle lasts approximately 90 minutes and consists of progressive deepening of NREM sleep, followed by a period of REM sleep. Early cycles are dominated by N3 slow-wave sleep, which supports physical restoration and the consolidation of declarative memory. Later cycles contain longer REM periods, which facilitate emotional processing, procedural memory consolidation, and problem solving. These alternating cycles illustrate how consciousness is not simply switched on or off during sleep, but instead fluctuates in both intensity and quality, depending on the stage and brain activity patterns. The fading of consciousness during sleep is paralleled by changes in neuromodulatory systems. Neurotransmitters such as norepinephrine, serotonin, and histamine, which promote wakefulness and alertness, decrease in activity during sleep. In contrast, inhibitory neurotransmitters, particularly GABA, increase in activity, promoting the suppression of arousal and the stabilization of sleep. Acetylcholine shows a unique pattern. It is relatively low during NREM sleep, but becomes highly active during REM sleep, supporting the cortical activity necessary for vivid dreaming. The interaction between excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters orchestrates the brain's transitions between different states of consciousness, allowing for both restorative deep sleep and the complex, internally generated experiences of REM sleep. Consciousness during sleep is also influenced by circadian rhythms, which are endogenous biological cycles that roughly follow a 24-hour period. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, located in the hypothalamus, acts as the master clock, synchronizing sleep-wake cycles with external light-dark cues. Circadian rhythms regulate the timing of sleep onset, the distribution of NREM and REM stages, and the overall architecture of sleep. Disruption of circadian rhythms, as occurs with jet lag or shift work, can affect the timing, quality, and restorative functions of sleep, highlighting the intricate relationship between brain activity, consciousness, and physiological regulation. Even as consciousness fades, some aspects of sensory processing remain active. The brain can respond to salient stimuli, such as loud noises or alarms, while largely ignoring background stimuli. This selective processing allows for survival by maintaining a minimal level of environmental awareness. Even during reduced consciousness, the thalamus plays a critical role in this selective gating, regulating which sensory information reaches the cortex. Similarly, during REM sleep, certain neural circuits involved in emotion and memory remain active, suggesting that consciousness during sleep is not simply absent, but reorganized and specialized to support adaptive functions. Sleep also serves as a model for understanding the dynamic and flexible nature of consciousness. The shifts between wakefulness, light sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep demonstrate that consciousness is not a single, uniform state, but a continuum that can vary in clarity, focus, and intensity. Neural activity is neither entirely on nor off, but exhibits graded patterns that correlate with subjective experience. This graded nature is observed not only in sleep, but in other states, such as drowsiness, meditation, anesthesia, and various disorders of consciousness. Studying sleep provides insight into how neural activity gives rise to subjective experience, and how consciousness can be modulated, altered, or suppressed without permanent loss. The interplay between conscious and unconscious processes is also evident during sleep. Automatic processes, such as the regulation of breathing, heart rate, and metabolic functions, continue uninterrupted, demonstrating that consciousness is not required for essential physiological activity. Similarly, the reactivation of memory circuits and the processing of emotions occur largely without conscious awareness. These processes highlight the division of labor between conscious and unconscious brain functions. Consciousness allows for flexible, directed interaction with the environment, whereas unconscious processes handle routine, essential, and restorative functions. Sleep exemplifies this division, with consciousness reduced or altered, while critical brain functions continue. Understanding the mechanisms of consciousness through the study of sleep has practical applications. Sleep disorders, such as insomnia, sleep apnea, and narcolepsy, involve disruptions in normal patterns of consciousness and brain activity. Research into the neural underpinnings of these disorders can inform the development of treatments that restore healthy sleep architecture and, consequently, normal patterns of consciousness. Moreover, insights from sleep research can inform our understanding of anesthesia, coma, and other altered states, providing a framework for predicting and modulating levels of consciousness in clinical settings. Finally, the study of consciousness during sleep underscores the adaptive value of varying conscious states. Wakefulness allows for complex interaction with the environment, problem solving, and social engagement. Sleep allows for restoration, memory consolidation, and emotional processing. Dreams provide a safe space for the simulation of experiences and the integration of emotions and memories. The brain's ability to transition fluidly between these states reflects both evolutionary pressures and the remarkable computational power of neural networks. Consciousness, therefore, is best understood as a dynamic, emergent property of the brain, shaped by millions of years of evolution to support survival, learning, and adaptive behavior. In conclusion, the gradual fading of consciousness during the transition to sleep is a window into the complexity, flexibility, and graded nature of conscious experience. It illustrates how the same neural circuits can support different levels and types of consciousness, depending on their activity patterns, neurotransmitter modulation, and interactions with broader neural networks. Sleep provides a natural demonstration of how consciousness can ebb and flow, how it can be altered without being entirely lost, and how it serves both cognitive and physiological functions. Studying these transitions enhances our understanding of consciousness itself and highlights the profound connection between brain activity, subjective experience, and the adaptive functions of mind and body. And now, as the night continues, as the body rests, as the mind drifts, as the quiet work of life flows gently within you, there is nothing else, nothing left to do, nothing to think about. This is the time for rest, for stillness, for calm, for today is complete, and all that remains is peace. May your sleep be deep and restorative. May your dreams be gentle and healing. May you wake refreshed, renewed, when the soft light of a new day arrives. Good night.